Pay attention to the man in the simple white kufi, the small embroidered skullcap that seems so at odds with the mountainous physique beneath it. The camera flashes are like lightning in the pre-dawn gloom, strobing against the high fences and coiled razor wire of the Indiana Youth Center. The date is March 25th, 1995. The time is just after 6 a.m. For 3 years, this man has been known not by his name, but by a number, 9223335. Now, he is a free man, walking out of the prison gates and into a world that has been waiting, watching, and wondering. He is Mike Tyson. And in less than 30 minutes, he will do something that makes his own lawyer, a man hardened by decades in the criminal justice system, break down and weep. This is not simply the story of a celebrity being released from prison. It is not just about the return of the most feared heavyweight boxer in a generation. This is the story of what happens in the first hour of a man's second chance. It's a story about a war for a man's soul, fought not under the bright lights of a Las Vegas arena, but in the quiet, sacred space of a neighborhood mosque long before the sun had risen. It is the story of a monster trying to become a man. To understand that morning, you must first understand the man who went into that prison. Not the boxer, but the force of nature that had been unleashed upon the world. Michael Gerard Tyson was not born. He was forged. Forged in the brutal streets of Brownsville, Brooklyn, a place where weakness was a death sentence. By the age of 13, he had been arrested more than 30 times, a boy so lost to the world that his own future seemed a foregone conclusion. But then came a man named Cus D'Amato, a legendary boxing trainer who saw past the juvenile delinquent and glimpsed the makings of a king. Cus did not just teach Mike how to fight. He gave him a home. He gave him a purpose. He adopted him, legally and emotionally, after Tyson's mother died. He molded the boy's raw, feral aggression into a weapon of terrifying precision. He told the boy over and over again that he would be the heavyweight champion of the world. He built an ego of ironclad certainty around a core of profound insecurity. The result was Iron Mike. At 20 years, 4 months, and 22 days old, he became the youngest heavyweight champion in history. He was not just a champion, he was a phenomenon, a cultural event. He fought with a peekaboo style, a bobbing, weaving ball of explosive power that overwhelmed opponents before they even knew what was happening. Most of his fights were not contests, they were executions. They were over in seconds, not minutes. Men who had trained their entire lives, warriors in their own right, would crumble before him, their courage evaporating in the face of his sheer, primal ferocity. He earned hundreds of millions of dollars. He was on the cover of every magazine. He was, without question, the baddest man on the planet. It was a nickname he cultivated, a brand he sold. But the armor of Iron Mike was built to protect a deeply wounded child. The problem was, the child was still inside, and he was raging. Cus D'Amato died in 1985, just a year before Tyson won the title. The one man who could control him, the one true father figure he had ever known, was gone. And the foundation of Mike Tyson's world began to crack. Without Cus, the parasites moved in. Promoters like Don King, who saw him not as a son, but as a living, breathing ATM. An entourage of hangers-on who encouraged his worst impulses. His life outside the ring became a public spectacle of chaos. A turbulent marriage to actress Robin Givens that played out in shocking television interviews. Street brawls, car crashes. A temper that could flare with volcanic intensity over the slightest perceived disrespect. The fighter who was the epitome of discipline inside the ropes became the epitome of indulgence and chaos outside of them. His training slackened. His focus drifted. The weapon that Cus D'Amato had so carefully honed began to rust. And then came the fall. First, in the ring. In 1990, in what is still considered one of the greatest upsets in sports history, he lost his title to a 42-1 underdog, Buster Douglas, in Tokyo. The invincible aura was shattered. He was knocked down, fumbling for his mouthpiece on the canvas, a dazed and beaten man. For the first time, the world saw that Iron Mike could bleed. But the true knockout blow came not from a boxer's glove, but from a judge's gavel. In July of 1991, Tyson was in Indianapolis for the Miss Black America pageant. There, he met a 19-year-old contestant named Desiree Washington. What happened in his hotel room that night would be furiously debated, but a jury would later be convinced of one version of events. Washington accused Tyson of luring her to his room and raping her. Tyson's defense was that the encounter was consensual. He was Mike Tyson. Women threw themselves at him. He could not comprehend that anyone would say no, or that if they did, he had to listen. His entire life, his fame, his power had insulated him from that simple, fundamental reality. The trial was a media circus. It peeled back the public facade of the celebrity athlete and exposed the crude, entitled, and often brutish man underneath. His testimony was a disaster. He came across as arrogant and dismissive. The prosecution, led by lead prosecutor Greg Garrison, painted a picture of a predator who used his fame and power to isolate and assault a young woman. They presented evidence from the rape kit, testimony from a limousine driver who described Washington as being in a state of shock, and the powerful, emotional testimony of Desiree Washington herself. On February 10, 1992, the jury delivered its verdict, guilty. Guilty on 1 count of rape and 2 counts of criminal deviant conduct. The baddest man on the planet, the invincible Iron Mike, was going to prison. The sentence was 10 years, with 4 suspended. He would serve his time at the Indiana Youth Center, a medium-security facility ironically named for a man who had his own youth stolen from him, and who was now convicted of stealing the innocence of another. Prison was the ultimate loss of control for a man obsessed with it. His initial days were filled with the same rage that had defined his life. He was inmate 922335, stripped of his Rolex watches, his silk suits, his fleet of luxury cars. He was just another man in a drab uniform, his days dictated by bells and head counts. He reportedly got into fights. He was surly, angry, and defiant. He was still Iron Mike, just in a smaller, more confined ring. He once told a prison therapist, "They took a monster and put him in a cage." But a cage can do one of 2 things to a monster. It can make it more ferocious, or it can give it time to think. For Mike Tyson, it started with books. He began to read voraciously. He read the works of Voltaire, of Shakespeare, of Machiavelli. He read Leo Tolstoy's War and Peace. He was drawn to great figures of history, men of power and conflict. But then his reading took a turn. He read the autobiography of Malcolm X. In the story of Malcolm Little, a street hustler and convict who transformed himself in prison into the powerful and articulate Malcolm X, Tyson saw a reflection. He saw the possibility of reinvention. He saw a path out of the mental prison he had been in long before he was physically incarcerated. It was through this book that he began to explore Islam. He met a man named Muhammad Siddiq, a Muslim cleric and scholar who counseled inmates. Siddiq was not impressed by Mike Tyson, the boxer. He was interested in Malik Abdul Aziz, the name Tyson adopted upon his conversion. Siddiq spoke to him not about boxing, but about accountability, about humility, about the concept of jihad, not as a holy war, but as the internal struggle against one's own base impulses, the struggle against the nafs, the ego. For Tyson, this was a revelation. His entire life had been about feeding his ego, about projecting strength, about dominating others. The idea of dominating himself was a foreign concept. His lawyer, Jim Voiles, a veteran Indianapolis attorney who had been part of his defense team, saw the change. He would visit Tyson and find him calmer, more introspective. The explosive rage was still there, simmering beneath the surface, but it was being brought under a new and unfamiliar discipline. Tyson began to pray 5 times a day. He studied the Quran. He lost weight, not just through physical training, but through fasting during Ramadan. The guards, who had initially been wary of the famous inmate, began to report a marked change in his behavior. The monster was learning to be still, but the world outside hadn't changed. As his release date neared, the frenzy began to build. Don King, ever the showman, was orchestrating his return. Multi-million-dollar television deals were being signed. Pay-per-view events were being planned. The world wanted Iron Mike back. They wanted the spectacle. They wanted the violence. They wanted the baddest man on the planet to be as bad as he ever was. The media descended on Plainfield, Indiana. Satellite trucks lined the streets. Reporters from around the globe set up camp, all waiting for that first glimpse of the freed man. They expected a circus. They expected a party. They expected Tyson to emerge, defiant and snarling, ready to reclaim his throne. And that brings us back to that cold March morning. At 6 a.m., the gates of the Indiana Youth Center slid open. A small group of men walked out into the blinding chaos of flashing lights and shouting reporters. In the center was Mike Tyson. He wore a dark suit over a white shirt, but on his head was the white kufi. It was the first signal that this was not the same man who had walked in 3 years earlier. He did not speak. His face was a stoic mask. He was flanked by his lawyers and by Mohammed Siddiq. They moved like a phalanx through the throng of media, pushing their way towards a waiting black Mercedes-Benz. Don King was there, of course, waving American flags, his hair standing on end as if electrified by the moment. He was trying to orchestrate the scene, to create a moment for the cameras. But Tyson seemed almost oblivious to him. He got into the car. The door slammed shut, a muffled boom against the cacophony outside. The car pulled away, leading a massive convoy of vehicles, a presidential-style motorcade for a man who had just been a prisoner. Inside the car, the atmosphere was tense. Jim Voiles, his lawyer, was there. He had prepared for this day for months. He had a plan. The first stop was supposed to be a nearby hotel for a press conference. Then, a flight to Tyson's home in Ohio. A celebration. A return to the life he had lost. But Tyson had a different plan. As the car moved down the highway, Tyson spoke. His voice was quiet, raspy. He did not want to go to the hotel. Not yet. He wanted to go to the mosque. He turned to Mohammed Siddiq and asked him to direct the driver. The convoy, filled with media, promoters, and hangers-on, followed, confused. This was not on the itinerary. They drove to a small, unassuming brick building in a quiet neighborhood of Plainfield, the Islamic Society of North America. It was a simple place, a world away from the glitz of Las Vegas or the grit of Brooklyn. The Mercedes pulled up. Tyson got out. He ignored the reporters who had scrambled out of their cars, shouting questions. He walked past Don King, who looked utterly bewildered. He walked to the door of the mosque. He took off his expensive shoes, leaving them on the steps, and he went inside. Jim Voiles, his lawyer, watched him go. He was a man of the law, a pragmatist. He had seen the worst of humanity. He was not a man given to sentimentality, but as he watched his client, the former heavyweight champion of the world, the man-child of rage and fame, walk into that quiet building to pray, something inside him broke. He began to cry. He would later describe the moment. He said, "I was just so proud of him. With all the money, with all the pulling and the tugging, with Don King out there with his flags, the first thing he wanted to do was go and thank Allah. That's when I knew this was a different man." It was the verdict on the internal trial that had been taking place for 3 years. The evidence was this one simple act. Inside the mosque, it was silent. The sun was just beginning to cast its first light through the windows. Tyson was met by the imam. He performed wudu, the ritual washing of his hands, face, and feet. Then, he knelt on a prayer rug. He was no longer the baddest man on the planet. He was not Iron Mike. He was not inmate 922335. He was just a man, head bowed to the floor, in a gesture of ultimate submission. He was Malik Abdul Aziz, a servant of God, giving thanks for his freedom. Imagine the scene. This man, whose body was a weapon that had generated hundreds of millions of dollars, whose fists had crushed the bones and spirits of other men, was now on his knees, whispering prayers in a language he had only recently learned. He was praying for forgiveness. He was praying for strength. He was praying for a future he could not yet see. This was the real fight, not against Trevor Berbick or Michael Spinks, but against the demons inside him, the rage, the ego, the legacy of pain he had inherited and the pain he had inflicted. And in that moment, on that rug, he won the first round. When he emerged from the mosque, the sun was up. He seemed calmer, more centered. He was finally ready to face the world. The convoy proceeded to the press conference. The room was packed. The world's media was there to see the monster, to see if the cage had made him meaner. He walked to the podium. He was flanked by Don King on one side and Mohammed Siddiq on the other, a visual representation of the war still being waged for his soul. The promoter and the preacher, the worldly and the spiritual. Tyson spoke. His voice was soft, almost shy. There was no bravado, no threats, no talk of destruction. He thanked his supporters, he thanked his legal team, and then he said something that stunned the room into silence. He said, "I just want to get on with my life, and I'm going to do that. I'm not going to be a crusader for any cause. I'm not going to say, I'm this and I'm that. I just want to live my life." He was asked about Desiree Washington. He was asked if he had a message for her. He was given the chance to apologize, to show remorse. He did not take it. He maintained his innocence, as he has to this day. He said, "I did not violate that woman." And that is the complex, uncomfortable truth at the heart of this story. The man who knelt in prayer, the man who made his lawyer weep with pride, was also a man convicted of a brutal crime who refused to acknowledge his victim's pain. His redemption, if it was to be one, was personal, not public. It was a conversation between him and his God, and the rest of the world was not invited. The journey from that day was not a straight line. The old Mike was not vanquished in that mosque. He returned to the ring and made hundreds of millions more dollars. He reclaimed a piece of the heavyweight title. But the demons were always there, waiting in the corner. There was the infamous bite fight in 1997, when he bit off a piece of Evander Holyfield's ear in the ring, a shocking act of barbarism that showed the world the monster was not dead, merely sleeping. There were more legal troubles, more financial ruin, more chaos. The internal jihad, the struggle against the self, is a lifelong war, and he lost many more battles. But that morning in Plainfield, Indiana, remains a crucial chapter. It was a pivot point. It was the day Mike Tyson chose, for the first time, to fight for himself, instead of for an audience. He chose humility over hubris. He chose prayer over a party. He chose a moment of quiet reflection over the roar of the crowd. What are we to make of this? What do you do with a story about a man who finds God, but not remorse? A man who seeks personal salvation, but offers no public apology? It forces us to confront an uncomfortable reality, that human beings are not simple characters in a story. They are not just heroes or villains. They are complex, contradictory, and often broken. Mike Tyson's life is a testament to that. He is a man who has been both the victim and the perpetrator, a man of incredible discipline and devastating self-destruction, a man capable of profound spirituality and shocking brutality. The tears of his lawyer that day were not for a saint. They were for a sinner who was trying, however imperfectly, to take the first step on a different path. It was the relief of seeing a man who had every reason to come out of prison bitter and vengeful, instead come out seeking peace. The cost of Tyson's actions remains immense. His career, while lucrative, never again reached the heights it could have. His legacy will forever be stained. And most importantly, the life of Desiree Washington was irrevocably altered. Her pain and her story cannot and should not be erased by his journey of self-discovery. Her truth, as validated by a court of law, is a permanent part of this narrative. But the story of that morning is not about erasing the past. It is about confronting the future. It's a cautionary tale about what can happen when immense talent is untethered from personal responsibility. It's a story about the devastating impact of losing your moral compass, the one person who keeps you grounded. For Tyson, that was Customato. After his death, Tyson was a ship without a rudder, tossed on the sea of his own fame and impulses. This is what you must understand. The most dangerous opponent any of us will ever face is not across from us in a ring or on a battlefield. It is the one that lives inside our own head. The ego, the rage, the insecurity, the voice that tells us we are entitled, that the rules do not apply to us. Mike Tyson, the baddest man on the planet, spent 3 years in a cage. And in that cage, he finally learned who his true opponent was. So when you see the old footage of him walking out of that prison, don't just see the boxer. Don't just see the celebrity. Don't just see the convicted rapist. See the man in the kufi. See the man who left his shoes at the door. See the man who made his lawyer cry, not with a display of power, but with a display of humility. because that moment, in the quiet of a small Indiana mosque, was the purest victory Mike Tyson ever won. It was a first-round knockout in a fight that continues to this very day. A fight for the soul of a man who was forged in hell, reached for heaven, and has spent his life wrestling in the purgatory between them.